I was asked a question over on TikTok, and it is something I've covered before, but not in a long time. And it's really, really important to understand. So a reminder to all of my old followers, thank you, and subscribers. And this is for the new gang. Why is it that the inner child healing is paramount to your ascension path? And what does it mean to say that the inner child holds the keys and codes to your divinity? I'm going to explain this. When you were deciding to come down here as a soul, and you're a fractal of the soul expressions that you chose to have, you decided your skin color, your orientation, your gender orientation, who the actors were that were going to be in your play, that were going to be your parents and your partners, and all of this sort of significant events that were going to happen in your life. That information was then like embedded into your soul's template, and then you drop down into human form. So from about 0 to 5 years old, all children, unless something interferes with that, all children are in consciousness first and human second, from about 0 to 5 years old. So they are trying to figure out the human body, which makes sense because from 0 to 5 is when you do all that stuff. But they're still highly connected to God's source consciousness, to the divine, to their higher self. They're still very much in their awareness as consciousness. Consciousness first, human second. At around 5 years old, 5 to 7 years old, developmental shifts within the human begin to take effect. So this isn't spiritual, it's developmental. At around 5 to 7 years old, the child begins to become aware that there's an outer reality that needs to be navigated. So then the questions become, who do I need to be around mom in order to feel safe? Who do I need to be around dad in order to feel safe? And then they go to school, and then there's peers, and there's teachers, and then there's coaches, and then there's friend groups, and right? So all of this needs to be navigated. How do I navigate this reality in the human form, feeling safe, loved, and validated? That's the creation of the ego. That is the ego identity. Those decisions that are made at 5 years old are being made for who the ego and how the ego is going to express itself. And then every decision thereafter is made based on sort of that core foundation. So on one hand, you can say, and be accurate, that everyone, regardless of their age in linear human age, is still operating from the childlike self, or childish self almost, until they come to do this work, until they come into some form of spiritual awakening, personal evolution, healing, personal awareness. Because the ego is a construct of the inner child. So that's how that all comes to form. So now what we have is, we have the layers. I'll just show you what the layers look like. The layers are the ego that presents as the human. Then there is sort of the wounded child, typically the things that happened to the child around the ages of 5 to 7, but it could have been sooner. That is the wounded child that separated itself from its divinity in order to create the ego, but then the ego became the adult and left the inner child. So it becomes this layering effect where you have your divine inner child, the magical one that holds all of your divinity and codes and memories. And then you have the wounded child, who's sort of the gate at the door. You can't get to my divinity until you see me, validate me, and love me. And then you have the ego that is a construct of that child. So those are the 3 layers, and those are the layers that we are undoing in order to come back home to our own divinity and the reason why we came here and all of the DNA activation and all of that stuff. So what does that look like? The ego has many, many, many layers. The ego sheds its many layers. All of the characters that it plays and the roles that it plays come into unification so that the ego doesn't disappear, doesn't dissolve completely, but its attachment to wounds and traumas and beliefs and stories dissolves so that we have a purified ego. That ego becomes more purified as we do that through our own healing work, as we learn to love and honor and cherish ourselves. That loving and honoring and cherishing of ourselves makes our beingness and our body a place that is safe for the inner child to come back home to. And once we have loved and unified with that inner child as a part of us back in our autonomy, then the keys and codes of our divinity are then released. Now, I'm saying all of this in very linear terms because I'm a human that's speaking linear language to other humans. I'm sure that there are more levels and layers and complexity to all of this, but understanding that your inner child, the magical one, is the key and code holder to your divinity. That aspect of you became a human around 5 to 7 years old and began to take on a lot of programming around what it needed to do, be, and how it needed to identify itself in this world in order to feel safe. And then that became the construct of the ego. And once we became the ego and went out in the world as we adulted, we completely left behind that aspect of ourselves. So the wounded inner child sits energetically as a fractal in your field, waiting to be called back home. And the calling of it back home is really about making it safe. The inner child doesn't actually need to be healed. You don't need to say nice things to it. You just have to be aware of how the inner child's wounds and programs are playing out in your life. And as you dissolve them, course correct them, and make new decisions and choices in how you approach your life and perceive yourself, you are in effect healing that inner child. And the more that you love and honor and cherish yourself, and that your vessel becomes a safe place for the child to come home to, then the inner child will integrate back in. That was a bunch of topics all in one, but it's really, really important. I can't get that information out enough. I think I've covered sort of the all-encompassingness of it all, and I hope that it helps you. Until next time, bye for now.